The LG C1 in the ring with the Sony A80J. Which one's better? Which one to buy? Let's find out. What's up? This is B the Installer, and this is a really exciting video for me, and I hope for you, because it might be the video to determine which is the best TV for the money in 2021. I'm going to go over the features and then show them head to head, and at the end I'll differentiate them so you can figure out which TV is right for you. But first, make sure to smash the like button when you find this video useful, and when you're down there, definitely let me know if you're looking at the LG C1 or the A80J, or if you have a better TV for the money in mind, let me know. And make sure to subscribe to the channel and set the bell to all so you'll be notified when I upload a new video or when I go live to discuss TVs and tech with other creators and answer your questions. So we're looking at two really great TVs, and it goes without saying that you'd likely be happy with either one of them. But let's go over the basics and then jump into direct video comparisons. Right off the bat, the Sony A80J is lighter and the box is front heavy. So don't do this. Now I've already shown this in the A80J video, and don't worry, everyone is okay. But others have reached out to me and noted that they found the TV box of the A80J to be really front heavy, so be careful when lifting it off the top. And that was the only scary part of the video, because the A80J sets up nicely on the feet similar to the 2020 A8H. You can position them in 4 ways: narrow or wider, and lower or raised up. It's pretty cool, but those feet can't compare to the 30-pound silver stand of the LG C1. With that base sitting so low, there was no way it was tipping over. Like the last 4 or 5 iterations of the C-Series TV, the LG C1 continues to be one of the coolest looking TVs on the market with a razor thin panel. Besides looking great, the stand also bounces sound from the downward firing speakers out to the audience. And I've noted the screen thinness and flexibility concerns me a bit, but it's probably just people handling these TVs all day that get worried about that sort of thing. The Sony A80J is no slouch either. I actually like the A80J design better than the A90J. This A80J has a great cube-like look, and the A90J, like the C1, has angled edges. Both of these TVs have 4 HDMI ports, but the LG has 4 that are HDMI 2.1, while the Sony has just 2 HDMI 2.1, and one of those is the eARC port. And I'll go into further detail regarding gaming, but if you're not a gamer, the 4 versus 2 HDMI 2.1 ports may not even matter to you. The remotes are very different besides the very basic buttons. The LG C1 has the Magic Remote, which can be quick to navigate as you get used to it. This year, the combination of that scrolling wheel and enter button is less likely to misfire and have you end up selecting an app above or below the one you choose. That was really annoying on the last couple LG remotes. It also sits flat now, so the cursor doesn't pop up as frequently when you bump the table. The Sony remote is longer and skinnier, and while I like the Bluetooth connectivity, I really wish it was the metal backlit remote of the A90J. It's sort of a slap in the face not to get that remote with this beautiful TV. But the good news is you can get that remote online, and it does work with the A80J. So let's turn these suckers on and quickly compare the OS. Now the TV that I'm not speaking about is dimmed down a bit, so don't freak out while I go over this stuff. The LG C1 has the updated WebOS 6.0. If you're new to OLEDs or LG, it's probably fine. But I've commented a couple times about how this full home screen is different than the pop-up that I liked in previous years. That pop-up allowed you to ponder different options before you actually made a selection. Now this C1 has an auto menu option where this pops up when you turn the TV on, but the only button that it has is the one that takes you to the full home screen. The other beef that I have with this TV is that I press exit a lot. And when you toggle between the apps and the home screen, the exit button actually takes you to the previous input, not the home screen. So it takes a bit to get used to it. And I appreciate the sports updates, and it has some trending content that's relevant, but a lot of what's populated is from other apps that I don't use. So it's a little bit of good and bad. The Sony Google OS is a little better, but not without issues. Basically, Google owns me, so I wouldn't be surprised if this TV knows my blood type by now. But I could see how that may suck for Apple users. It's a different world and all. And speaking of which, both of the TVs have an Apple TV app, but the Google TV has different menus at the top versus having to scroll down. So the main homepage and the For You section both populate with content mostly relevant for the apps you're logged into, but after checking, it also recommends things like the Apple TV app that I don't use. So touche, LG WebOS. Both TVs have the various voice assistants, which are very helpful, and both TVs have different art modes. The LG is brighter and it has some motion to the scene, which I think is cool. But the Sony images are darker but look really amazing. And when pressing left or right, it moves through those images for whatever that's worth. Having the weather and time doesn't make me feel great about the Sony, though I don't plan on leaving this TV on very often. So there's many subtle differences, but let's get into the content before finishing with the differentiators. So I'm gonna go over the typical SDR cable, HDR movies, and some gaming, as per usual with my comparisons. And there's definitely some interesting things to talk about. Before I get too far into this, I wanted to say that there's one spot where I thought it looked a little bit too bright, and that's in the game mode, and I'll let you know when I get there. But for the most part, I exposed the camera to the dimmest TV, and so I don't want you to think that one of them's washed out. It just might be that it's a bit brighter so that you guys can see it for yourself. And secondly, both TVs were calibrated in a manner to get the white points to the same spot by my friend Magician AV. So if you like to geek out on calibration and color, check out his channel. He actually helped me with all 4 of the top OLEDs, so I'll have more videos to come. So the SDR was sort of a split decision. The LG C1 was an improvement to me over the LG C10. The C10 tried to exact the upscaling and had more noise in the picture. The C1 looked more Sony-like to me, as I've notated before, and comparing them directly confirms that. But the Sony looks even better with this low-res content. It's very sharp when you get up close or even from 8 to 10 feet away. But this sort of stuff is pretty hard to see unless you have both sets to compare. In these two modes, ISF bright for the LG versus custom for the Sony, the LG looks brighter full screen and for a majority of the SDR content, but then it would get brighter in some areas on the Sony. So the LG has the logo luminance lowered and the Sony has the XR processor where it's pushing highlights. So it's interesting to see that at play in some of these scenes. But that begs a good question. Do you really want the processor changing content? Do you want some things brighter that the creator didn't intend that way? That XR processor has great motion as well, and I'm gonna go over that a bit later, but more or less the Sony looked a bit better than LG on motion. So overall, the Sony has a very crisp picture and slightly better motion, but the color actually looks a bit better on the LG and it's brighter with these settings. So which would win there? Sharp and smooth image or bright and colorful? Let me know in the comments. But let's compare the HDR footage now. Again, it was interesting to have these two fight it out, and HDR got even better. The LG C1 is in Dolby Vision Cinema Home with the typical settings, and I started both TVs with the auto contrast on off. And the LG picture looks better in every way over last year's LG C10. Last year my C10 was clearly brighter than my Sony A8H, but this year Sony's not messing around either. Set to Dolby Vision Bright, this animated movie looks extremely sharp on the Sony A80J. And it seems to have a brightness advantage. And that's not all, folks. There's room for more depending on how you like it. Both TVs looked even better to me by setting the auto dynamic contrast to high, which caused a slight bit of noise, but when I moved the noise reduction to medium, it cleared it up and it made these two pictures look about as good as you can on Dolby Vision. And if you want even more, Sony has an adjustment for tone mapping, and if you set it to brightness preferred, it's blinding bright. And the LG C1 can't get there. And I tried that for tone mapping and gradation preferred, but I just preferred to leave tone mapping off for the best results in Dolby Vision. And LG doesn't have a tone mapping toggle for Dolby Vision, so it looks like a fair fight in these settings. Both TVs were amazing, and you'd be lucky to have either, but I'm definitely seeing a slight brightness advantage on the Sony while also having better detail both in the highlights and shadows. As for the motion, the cinematic movement is a great happy medium between stutter and soap opera effect on the LG. And the Sony looks pretty good no matter where you put it, but I prefer the motion flow smoothness set to 2 and the Cinemotion to high. So really whichever end of the motion spectrum you're on, the Sony has a slight edge. So what's not to like about the Sony A80J here? I really think it's one of the best TVs I've ever seen in HDR, and this year being brighter than the LG C series, I'd have to give the A80J a slight edge in HDR. But again, we're talking top versus literally like the next best in HDR picture, and it's not over because it's on to gaming. Gaming is a little easier to pick apart. We aren't really fighting fair here as one of the TVs, the Sony A80J, is missing features at the time of this review. So just the two HDMI 2.1 ports running 4K at 120 and not much else. VRR, coming is the word. Frustrating that even Hisense has gotten 4K at 120 working with VRR in a year, but not Sony. The PS5 with the Sony is rumored to have a VRR type connection, but nothing official. And it's just been a tough year if you're a Sony fan when it comes to next-gen gaming. Just the fact that you have to manually change the HDMI port from enhanced to Dolby Vision enhanced seems kind of old school. But besides that settings change, I likely wouldn't notice much of the rest in gameplay. And it could be the same for you. And I'm about to dissect who should buy what, but for those who are more experienced gamers, this is what makes LG C1 such a great TV. The LG has 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, G-Sync, FreeSync Premium, and it all runs smoothly. Additionally, you get the Game Optimizer on the 2021 OLEDs, where you can get quick access to all the settings and customize depending on the genre of the game, as well as add the blue light filter or change the motion and lag settings. All to say that there isn't a TV on the planet that's better than the LG C1 for gaming. Not to mention that I think it actually looks better than the A80J in game mode as well. This is where I noticed the raised black levels on the A80J. And I tried messing with the gamma settings and tone mapping for gradation, but it was really tough to get the A80J to look like the C1. The closest I came was by reducing the black level to 38 out of 100, where it's normally 50. And that took a bit of the brightness, but that's the best I could do. But I'm being really picky, and it's probably more about which features you can live with or without. And that's a really good segue into the last few differences and which TV you should buy. So the last couple things that separate these two TVs are not going to affect everyone, but are worth noting. So the first is the new matte finish on the Sony A80J. In my A80J, I mentioned that it had a matte type finish, but it wasn't handling the reflection quite as well, and I got a lot of confused people in the comments. So have a look for yourselves. It's not that the Sony A80J is awful like many matte finish LED TVs, but I think the LG C1 and the glossy coat looks better here. It definitely handles the direct light better. But when the light's on my face, like it would be if there's ambient light in the room but not on the screen, it looks closer, and maybe you like the matte finish. Let me know what you think about this. Does this matter to you? Then another hardware difference is the ATSC 3.0 Next Gen tuner. So it's still a little out there on major content to watch on this 4K tuner, but the LG C1 doesn't even have it. So if it's a must for you, it's either a Sony or you'd have to get the LG G1. But then you'd have to mount it on the wall and all that. So at this point, I'm thinking the G1 on a stand would actually be a pretty good looking TV. And speaking of wall mounting, that brings me to the last difference. The Sony A80J has the acoustic surface audio, where the sound comes directly out at you from the screen. So on the stand or on the wall, it sounds great. On the other hand, the LG C1 has pretty good sound on the stand, but when it's on the wall, that deflector is gone, and so the sound is not as crisp. So as the TVs are here, the A80J has a definite advantage, while the C1 sound is kind of getting lost in the room. So now, which one of these TVs are we gonna buy? I was thinking about this probably a little bit too much, to be honest, but I really wanna help people, and sometimes people just need a definite answer. Maybe that's you. With the LG having a clear advantage in gaming and looking pretty good in SDR, I started to come up with some numbers that may or may not make sense. But if I knew someone was going to be gaming at least 50% of their time or more, especially with PC or next-gen console, I would probably recommend a majority of them to get the LG C1. From what I've gathered in the comments and from other creators, it seems like 50% plus gamers, the LG C1 gaming advantage outweigh the lack of detail in HDR or maybe a bit sharper image of the Sony A80J. But I said a majority of those gamers, because many people may want the next-gen tuner or the better speakers of the A80J. And on the flip side, if you're gaming less than 50% of the time, I'd be more inclined to recommend the Sony A80J. You're still getting 2 HDMI 2.1 ports and a top HDR picture quality, probably rivaling the Sony A90J, and great speakers. I mean, the Sony A80J is a really high quality TV. Besides those gaming features, the only thing I can find to complain about this TV is the remote and maybe the matte finish on the screen. It seems like I'm really grasping at straws. Oh yeah, and pricing. While the Sony OLED were priced higher in 2020 and initially in 2021, at the time of this review, the 65-inch A80J and LG C1 were the same at $2,500. And the 77-inch A80J was $1,000 off its initial price at $3,500. While the 55-inch C1 was actually less at $1,800, and only the C1 has a 48-inch. And you can get these two TVs anywhere. Costco even has both models, even though the Sony model is slightly different with the CJ in there. And what about the LG C1 and 83-inch? That's another video. So final answer, if I had to pick one, I'd say flip a coin? No, I'm kidding. I probably would choose the Sony A80J just because of the amazing picture, the XR processor, Google OS, the acoustic speakers, and I could just buy the remote online, right? Now that's not very fair, but I would. But I don't really game, so maybe you'd get the LG C1 if you game more than half the time with the glossy screen and the magic remote. What do you think? What's the best TV buy of 2021? Do you think Google really knows my blood type? Let me know in the comments. Make sure to smash the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell, and go watch an install video so you can be the installer.